Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Editorial. Yesterday, we heard the news of 13 people dying in a helicopter crash and one seriously injured. The 13 people included Chief of Defense Staff, Mr. Bipin Rawat, his wife, Mrs. Madhulika Rawat, Brigadier L.S. Linder, Lieutenant Colonel H. Singh, Wing Commander P.S. Chauhan, Squadron Leader K. Singh, Junior Warrant Officer Das, Junior Warrant Officer Pradeep, Havaldar Satpal, Naik Gurusevak Singh, Naik Jitendra, Lance Naik Vivek, and Lance Naik S. Teja. 13 people were dead. One group captain, Varun Singh, is still fighting for his life. He's still on life support as we understand it. CDS and his crew was flying from Solur to Wellington. He was going to give a lecture in Defence Service Staff College in Wellington. And that's when this incident happened near Ooty. Let's figure out what was the cause of this incident. They were flying an MI-17. Let's figure out what was the cause of this incident. Of course, what we are going to discuss are assumptions. These are not reports. So please don't take it as reports. They are assumptions. And I have with me one of India's foremost safety aviation expert, Captain Mohan Ranganathan, who will be talking to us. And let's understand from him as to what could have happened. His version. Let's get right into the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Captain. Thank you so much. Captain, my first question is helicopter ride dangerous?
Not at all. It is just that when you don't follow certain discipline procedures, then it can be dangerous.
What went wrong with CDS Bipin Rawat's chopper?
See, just now, a little while back, I saw footage put out by ANI on Twitter of the last bit of the helicopter before it crashed. And you can see that there were a lot of low clouds, and it was the ascending terrain. And from what I hear from other sources, that normally from Sulu to Wellington, they take a path which is on the western side of the one hill. Actually, the terrain is not so high there, and that is the usual path they take. But yesterday, apparently, they have taken a path which was BLR or something, where the terrain is a bit steep, and they've gone through that. And you see, and I also heard that the aircraft was flying very low. And when you're low and you're trying to climb at the same time, I suspect that they have not catered for the downwash from the router. You're very low and you're using high power because you're climbing, which means you've got to be at high power. And the downwash is going to be blowing the tree. And the trees are not rigid, they are flexible. So once the downwash effect is gone, it's going to whiplash back. I think maybe they didn't cater for that, because that's what it looks like. And I don't know why they took that stupid decision of flying in that weather. It's not a weather for flying. Definitely not for a helicopter.
The problem was because they were flying low. Is that what you're saying, sir? According to you?
No, the humidity, the clouds.
The clouds.
Very low clouds. The humidity was extremely high yesterday. It was 95% humidity, low clouds. And they should have gone by road, if you ask me. Why they, if you look at the time frame that they had given, the flight from Delhi landed at 11:34 and they took off at 11:48 or something. So in 14 minutes, it would have been like, it was almost like the decision was taken out of his hands. And this has been the case with almost all the VVIP flights. Now, if you look at Madhura Sindhya's flight in 1990s, he insisted on the pilot continuing even though the weather at Kanpur was extremely bad. He was going for a meeting. The same thing happened with Balayogi, the Speaker of Lok Sabha. He insisted on flying. And I don't know why the helicopter pilots can't refuse to operate if the weather conditions are well. Same thing happened with YSR. You know?
Correct.
So the VVIPs don't leave the judgment to the man in the cockpit. For them, attending a meeting or attending something is a lot more important.
But then I go back to my first question. I was just reading somewhere that in United States from 1999 to 2019, there were 3,000 chopper crashes. Sir, if chopper rides are safe, then why so many crashes, sir?
Don't look at the 3,000 per se. Look at the total number of chopper flights in US. It'll be millions. So 3,000 crashes in so many years for millions of flights. If you take the percentage, it will be small.
Aircraft versus a chopper, which one is safe, sir?
I would definitely prefer a fixed wing aircraft. It's a lot more safer because everything is under your control. There are a lot of variables in the chopper, like the rotor is both the engine and then you keep changing the angle of the rotor to create that aerofoil effect. So just one minor mistake can make a huge difference. While here, the variables are much less in a fixed wing aircraft.
Are you thus suggesting that the skill required to fly a chopper is far higher than the skill required to fly an aircraft?
No, it's totally different. Achha. Because in a chopper, they have a different set of skills. And because they're flying low and slow, I mean, the factor of closing in on an obstacle or closing in on your destination, you have a lot more time to react. While on a fixed wing aircraft, especially a jet, the time to react is much less.
Let's go to this MI-17. Sir, how is this aircraft? How is this chopper? MI-17, we've bought it from Russia. In fact, these choppers were assembled in India. So how are these aircraft, sir? How are these choppers, technically speaking?
If you listen to all the TV interviews yesterday, you had some of the top Air Force officials like Air Chief Marshal, Fali Major, and several others who've flown that thousands of hours. They swear by that aircraft. So, and when you see the amount of flying they do, the Mi-15, the V5, they say is very safe, and they all talk about glass cockpit. Now, I Googled and I looked at the image of V5 cockpit. Now, the display is not the typical glass cockpit display that we have in the 320 or the 737 or the 777s. What we have is the PFDND, primary flight display, and the navigation display. But if we look at the MI-17 V5, it seems to have the analog display on the glass cockpit, like what the original Jet Airways 737 NGs used to have. So you're not really getting the benefit of a full glass cockpit there. It is computerized, but the display is analog. Maybe to have a common factor between other helicopters that they have, because they have the older Mi-17s also. You can't have a dedicated crew for one with a glass cockpit. So to have the commonality, they must have chosen the analog instruments. But in the analog display, you lose out a lot of information. Like, if you had the primary flight display and the navigation display type, the terrain display on the radar, the terrain display on your navigation display is so good, it'll indicate the terrain very clearly. while on the analog display you can't get that.
Is there a difference between a fully imported aircraft like this MI-17 was imported from Russia but assembled in India? Sir, is there a quality difference between a fully imported aircraft and an aircraft which is imported and assembled in our country? Is there a difference?
I don't think so. I mean, even if you import and assemble it here, I mean, they'll be having very, very strict quality control. And I think Indian Air Force has a very high standard of quality control. So that is not an issue, whether it is imported intact or whether it is assembled here. On the, in a civilian aircraft, it is not there. You can't import and assemble here. We don't have the facility.
It's purely because we don't have the facility, or is it because one prefers a fully imported aircraft? Is that the way, sir?
We don't have the facility. Manufacturers and the certification agency of the manufacturing country has to have faith in your capability. See, like, you have parts being made for Boeing as well as 320, but you don't have the fully assembled Boeing or Airbus facility here. We may make the parts, but we don't have the facility.
That's now different with fighter jets, isn't it? Because fighter jets we do assemble in India.
Yeah.
Is it because that's handled?
That's handled by the Air Force.
Correct.
It's not handled.
Correct. So that's the core difference. Sir, if you were to prepare a safety manual for chopper rides in India, especially for politicians and busy people who have important meetings to attend, and therefore possibly they push their pilots to kind of fly no matter what the weather is, what will be that manual be, sir? What will be those 5 points you would like to say that these VIPs should be wary about before they get into a chopper?
First and foremost, like we used to have an operation manual in Indian Airlines in the 80s. And one of the first lines in that is the pilot in command decision is unquestionable, irrespective of the rank of the passengers. So you can be the civil aviation minister, you can be the prime minister, but if he was flying on my flight, my decision is final. So that is something that we need to emphasize. Like if you take all the accidents which we've had with the VVIPs, you see, they have a time schedule to reach somewhere. And they want to reach as soon as, now take for yesterday. Quite possible that he had a lecture at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Correct.
He's taken off from there at 11:48. Probably after reaching Wellington, they might be having a luncheon. So this is to cater for that. I understand the police convoy was there to take care of road travel if they required, but they opted for the helicopter. So when you have a safer option, when I'm sure that the pilots would have known that the cloud base was very low in Wellington. I don't know how the investigation is going to be. I want to make a statement about that Air France 340 crash in Toronto.
Yes, sir.
The lead investigator, Ria Levasa, I always quote him in many of my safety presentations. He was asked by the press, whether it was a pilot error. And his response is something which is fantastic. And I wish both our civil aviation and military investigators follow that dictum. He said, humans are humans, they are not machines. I look at what the human did. I don't look at the pilot, what mistake he made. But I look at why he did what he was not trained to do.
Correct.
I think that is a beautiful way of looking at an accident investigation. You don't prejudge, and he doesn't look at human error, he doesn't look at pilot error. Like here, if you looked at all the TV shows yesterday, everyone was talking about General Rawat. And if you looked at all the air chief marshals and air marshals and lieutenant generals, every one of them were talking what a fantastic chopper MI-17 V5 is. But did you have one person who spoke about the two pilots? Not one. In any of the TV shows that I saw yesterday, not one spoke about the two pilots. What made the pilots do what they did? Why did they go? Like, there was a clear path which they normally fly, and he was taking a different path yesterday. Why did he do it? Was it like, let me tell you, I'm not an investigator, but if you do the analysis of the cell phone of the captain or the people in Sulu and those who are in Wellington, the number of calls which that must have been made in the morning to discuss the weather. If you do an analysis, you will know that they were aware. But in spite of that, if he was asked to go, you see, if I was a person, I would have flatly refused. But in a military, in the hierarchy, when the top man tells you, I have to get there at such and such a time, you know, the peer pressure is too much for someone to refuse. And that is what. But I felt very sad that not one discussion, not one statement by the top military, retired people in the panels, not one of them even spoke about the pilots. And that's what made me very sad.
So we are assuming, per se, sir, you are assuming that the pilots were aware that the weather was bad, and we are assuming, I'm sure, that they were told that they have to still fly. That is an assumption we are making. But let's go further, sir. Sir, tell me.
I can tell, as a pilot, if I know that the conditions are very bad and it's not safe, I wouldn't have taken off. Correct. So unless, a pilot has, the person who flew has to have been very strong to deny the top people if they were pressurized.
Sir,
and that will never come out. That'll never come out in the report because they protect themselves.
Are we completely ruling out any technical snags at this point in time?
I would rule out technical snag looking at the helicopter flying in that video just a few seconds before the crash. It doesn't look like he had any problem. They were flying. And looking at the images which are on display, you can see that one of the tree trunks, which is on one of the photographs, it's a clean cut. Now, if you've hit the top of the tree and it breaks, there'll be a lot of jagged ends. You can see that it's like a saw has gone through. That's possible only if a high-speed rotor sliced that tree. And so his engine thrust must have been high because he was climbing, because he was going up a gradient of the side of the hill. So his thrust must have been almost maximum. So the rotor speed would have been high. So looking at that wooden piece, it clearly shows. Now, a good investigator will be able to find out what angle he struck. And they'll know whether he was trying to climb there or he was trying to fly level. So, correct. I was told that he's hit a tree in the reserve forest area and then a tree in the tea plantation where they crashed. So if you look at that, it looks like they were hugging the terrain just to keep it in sight, just like what happened in YSR crash. But the report hid all that.
My last question to you, sir. In your mind, can you reconstruct what happened, and can you take us through what could have happened during the last few minutes of the aircraft? What could have happened inside? What was the pilot thinking? What was the pilot doing? I mean, these are assumptions I understand because the investigation report has yet to come. But what do you think would have happened in the last few minutes in that aircraft, sir?
When you see a terrain coming at you, now, in poor visibility, now if you're not used to flying in that particular area, I mean, you're under a lot of stress, and people don't realize that. Like there was a NASA study done for an airline pilot. Like when you are under extreme stress, your adrenal glands pump very, very fast. There is huge sugar depletion. And when there is sugar depletion, your decisions are all clouded. Now, it'll be very interesting if the investigators find out what the pilots had before they departed. Whether they had some food, whether they had. So at that point, because of the stress of seeing the terrain, he can't see the terrain. Probably he's seen the trees coming at him. At that point, only the voice recorder. Now they found the voice recorder and the flight data recorder. So whatever conversations that took place from the time they took off till the time they crashed will be there. Now the question is, are we going to get the full details of what the voice recorder and the flight data recorder shows? If it's embarrassing, I can tell you that they'll probably say that it was damaged in the fire. I've seen that happening in several crashes, when they don't want to speak about something which is embarrassing, they will do that. And here, I feel that, they should go and read a research paper after Ron Brown's crash during the Gulf War. He was the Secretary of Commerce who was going, this crash took place in Dubrovnik in Croatia. The 737 Air Force pilots, they did an approach to a runway which is in poor visibility without a procedure. They did an artificial procedure and they crashed. And of course, the final report initially had blamed the pilots. But this researcher from Kansas University has published a thing which talks of accountability. You have the political accountability, the professional accountability, and things like that. And if there's Air Force investigation of this crash, because it's a very high profile crash, so it's in their interest to identify and ensure that something like this doesn't happen.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you so much for enlightening us with what could have happened. Thank you, sir.